Today's episode of Naija Nerds is brought to you by, I don't even know what letter to say it's brought by because our guest has so much content out there. So let's just say it's brought to you by the letter Y for YouNeek Studios or by the letter R for Roye Okupe, the CEO and chief visionary of this trailblazing transmedia company that's been behind some of the more noted Afrofuturistic and African history inspired comic book series. Welcome, Roy. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you so much. And I think I need to hire you to do my intros moving forward for every event, every guest appearance, because that was amazing. I'm like, who is he talking about?
Well, I'll tell you this much. My rates are not that high. So let your people call my people. Yeah?
Awesome. We'll do that.
I'm also joined by my brother in arms from the Naija Nerds, Olawale. How you doing, man?
I'm fine. Glad to be here as usual.
Awesome. So we're going to be talking about some of the amazing stuff that Roy's been doing. For those who don't know, Roy heads the YouNeek Studios. Now, YouNeek Studios, you can find them online at YouNeek Studios.com, is a transmedia company noted for telling African stories of a high quality. He's created a very, very engaging universe of characters with well-crafted, interconnected stories, fully rounded characters, actually well-developed with real motivations that, in fact, I can see myself in one or two people there in the storylines I've read. And I just want us to take the time to get into some of that. So first things first, we're going to talk to Roy and ask a real simple question. Why? Like, what makes a guy like you decide to run away from a pretty decent paying job and, jump feet first into this world?
I mean, why is a very good question to ask, because I think for anything that's important, if you don't know why you're doing something, it can only last for so long. For me, it was just revisiting my own childhood and looking at what are some of the stories I would have loved to see. Growing up, I always joke that, growing up, like for me, animation and superhero stories, it was sort of like love at first sight. And like my mom would literally have to drag me away from the TV just so I could get to school. But very early on, I realized very quickly that there was a missed opportunity not creating these stories from an African perspective. And as a child, it wasn't even political. I know a lot of people have politicized it for very good reason. But for me, it was just more like, wow, can you imagine seeing all these action set pieces, these fantastical elements, these superhero powers, as told from an African perspective, taking place in Lagos or, taking place, in the 15th century, during the medieval era. And, I kept on wishing to see it, and it never came to pass. So for me, it was really just revisiting my childhood and saying, okay, I really want to start to create, some of these things that I never saw, growing up. And I've always had a desire to tell my own stories. I actually never knew that I would get the opportunity to do so with comics and animation. It was just something that just felt like a pipe dream. But this is always what I've wanted to do. I've always wanted to be part of, for lack of a better word, geek culture, whether that's, movies, comics, animation, video games. I just wanted to be a part of it in one shape or form. But to be able to now run a company that, produces the materials is, it's truly a blessing. But so for me, why to answer, to bring that home, like why for me, it's just because it's what I've always wanted to see personally. And now I get an opportunity to do that.
So that raises a question. I know you've said in the past that you started getting interested in this world or this whole geek culture from the screen, not the printed page.
Yeah.
So I have to wonder, as somebody who also, like you, grew up in Nigeria, I understand. I relate to that. But I am also curious because I know for me, I came across some African creators. Like, I don't know if you ever read him back in the day, the serial that was published in Vanguard newspapers back in the day, Captain Africa. Did you happen to ever read that?
I never read that, but obviously I heard about that. Supa Strikas is one that I think a lot of us back then read. And
True.
it's amazing because it's still going on. So it's just crazy the amount of consistency that they've been able to put, over decades. But yeah, I never read that particular Captain Africa series in Vanguard. But one thing that obviously you realize growing up back then is that it wasn't really accessible to get comic books like it was here in the 90s or in the 80s. There were still, like, don't get me wrong, people sold comic books in Nigeria.
Sure.
They just weren't like 50 stores in Lagos or like I don't even know if there were 10 or 5. Maybe there was one. I never knew about it, but I knew that certain supermarkets did sell comics. And so that, for me, I think if I grew up here, I'd have been way more into comics than I was back then. But when it came to like animation, at least we could all watch that on TV. You could watch Justice League, watch Ninja Turtles, could watch Transformers. You could watch Spider-Man and all these different animated shows that obviously were easily accessible back then in Lagos. So for me, that's really where I got the connection into geekdom, was through animation. And when I moved over to the United States, that's when I started now getting into comic books, retroactively, going back and reading some of the old issues and then getting current, and then falling in love with that medium, and then seeing, how can I now use this to sort of like kickstart my own career?
I did the exact same thing when I moved here. Like I had time, and I found out my local library had stores and stores of the stuff for free. So I just immersed myself. But going back to something interesting, specifically, this was something I noticed. I'm going to date myself here, of course. But I used to read Captain Africa comics, the strip, in the 90s, the early 90s. I was reading this in Vanguard back then. And I remember clearly when there was a transition from the spandex wearing Captain Africa to a character who dressed, his outfit became more inspired by some of the African tribal wears. Like he started to dress in a different way. Yeah, exactly. You remember that, right?
Really?
Yeah. And then there was also a shift. Like I wondered I wish we could get Andy Ackman, the creator of that book, on here one day to actually ask him what made him realize that he needed to go from emulating the West to showcasing, Africa. And I want to use that as a jump point to a question for you.
Sure.
One of your most noted works is a book called Malika, which is the story of an African queen, a warrior queen. It's a great tale on so many levels, right?
Thank you.
Because it starts from it's set in 15th century Africa. It's obviously a fictional work. It's inspired. It's inspired by a number of actual real African queens.
Yes.
So maybe tell us a little bit about that and why you decided to go in that direction. Fantasy but rooted in reality and realism and actual history from the get-go.
Yeah, I'm not going to speak for Andy, but I think I can sort of relate to that transition, because my first graphic novel was EXO, and you're wearing that on your shirt now. That's more of a Afrofuturist. I use that term very loosely because a lot of people think differently when you say Afrofuturist. Like there's debate about the definition. It's a futuristic superhero sci-fi story that takes place in 2025 Lagos. And that was my own opportunity to throw this character who gets these power. He doesn't get this power. He gets this super suit that his father passed down to him, but he doesn't even want to be a hero because he actually hates his dad. Which for me, it's really the crux of the story, and what really makes Wale Williams interesting as a character is that inner struggle of trying to forgive your father, but at the same time trying to save an entire city. It's that push and pull between I need to fix myself in order for me to fix everything around me and not do it the other way around. But a lot of times people overlook that and they see it as face value, and it's like, oh, this is just another guy wearing a suit. Saving the city. And I don't blame people for making those conclusions. I always beg people, please at least read the first chapter. It's like 17 pages, and you very, very quickly see that it's different from all the other things that you've read before. But why am I saying this? I say that to say that EXO was my first take on Lagos, throw a superhero in there, and try to put in things that not only Nigerians can relate to, but people in the global audience can relate to, but just show like Nigeria as it is right now, because there's a lot of, at least back then when I first started, because I started this in 2012. This was before, unofficially in 2012. This was before Wakanda Forever and Black Panther. And again, rest in peace, Chadwick Boseman. Just very heartbreaking stuff that happened. But this was before that time, so a lot of people didn't even give daylight to these type of stories. So for me, it was I really wanted to show people the Lagos that you don't get to see on CNN, that you don't get to see, because most of the times, like, they show kids, starving, or they're showing parts, the safaris and all that. Exactly. And it's not that these things don't exist. It's just not the full story. Like, paint the full picture. That's what I wanted to do with EXO. But with Malika, for me, it was now a chance for me to say, okay, let me now take this back to pre-colonial Africa, because that's another misconception. When people think about Africa, they don't realize that, there were these massive kingdoms with kings and queens, and, these epic set pieces and conflicts and things that happened during that era, before the whole slavery thing happened. And I really wanted to take people back and show people, because I'm a very strong proponent of, you can't really see where you're going if you don't know where you're coming from. Right. And to me, creating this character, and another reason why it's a female lead, that's another thing that I really wanted to put out there, because let's not even talk about, there's not enough Africa characters of color when it comes to superheroes. You want to talk about Black women leading like these type of stories, fantasy and superheroes. It was almost non-existent at that time, and that's something, because growing up, I was surrounded with strong women. My mom, my two sisters, and even now my wife. And that's what I wanted to put out there. So for me, it was really about showing people in Africa that you don't necessarily get to see the history, and just showing the amount of, for lack of a better word, the epic nature of what pre-colonial Africa was, and bringing that to light in fantastical form as well.
I think one thing that comes out in your work is that you clearly have a great respect for women in terms of what they can do, and the fact that they are not just the backbone of society, but they actually should be in the forefront and allowed to be in the forefront. Many times the leaders of our societies, some of our most epic leaders in history, especially in Africa, some of them have been women. So one thing that strikes me is, you must have had a great time doing your research, because for better or worse, a lot of African history has been of the oral form, transmitted by oral history.
Yes.
Which made it difficult for that to continue, especially when the colonialists came in, and a lot of that disruption with people moving back and forth came, and disruption in societal norms and lifestyles. So what was the process for you digging into the past and finding out all the things you needed to look into? Like, who were your sources? Where did you go, and how did you find some of that stuff? Where can people even look up some of these characters that you
for me, like, one thing that I feel very fortunate to be able to grow up in this era is the age of the internet, right? I always say that, honestly, there's no excuse anymore. If you're looking for details about something, if you're looking for reference, if you're looking for, knowledge about a particular topic that you want to research, you don't have an excuse anymore, because the information is there. Like, there's a slang that we use, Google is your friend. So for me, the internet and just the vastness of the amount of compilation of data that is out there was one of the first resources. The second one was actually just reaching out to people that I know that are really connected. It's funny to say, but there are times where I'll just call my mom and my dad, and then I'll ask them things, about African history or Yoruba culture. Okay, why is this done that way? Or, I saw this online. Is this true? And then even going to, as far as like reaching out to, historians and other people that are knowledgeable in the industry, even colleagues, as well. Like, even, one of the people that we're going to be talking with on the Dragon Con, panel is Paul Louis Julie. And he's like, I call him a historian, because he spent a lot of time, researching African history, African cultures. So interacting with people, people like that. And then there were also a lot of books that I bought, and off the top of my head, and I can look at my Kindle right, as we're talking, and I'll give references on that because there's so much in my head. Like I just, lately it's like a lot of things. So sometimes I'm trying to remember things, and I can't remember. But there's a lot of good resources. The history of the Yorubas is one of them. That's not pertaining necessarily to Malika. That was more used for my latest book, Iyanu, which is also something a book that takes place in pre-colonial, West Africa, as well. So those there's not one particular resource. It's a combination of talking to people, reading books, Google, asking questions, verifying, and then watching things like even documentaries as well. So it's really a combination of things that has helped me to be able to put together these characters, as inspired by real people and real events and real places that existed in West Africa.
Awesome. So, do you get the like when you get the inspiration for the character, does a story arc form in your mind, or you get inspiration, then you do all the research, and then based on the research, you craft your story?
Yeah, it works in different ways. For Malika, it started with Queen Amina of Zazzau, she was a real African queen, warrior queen that existed in the 16th century. And, it's funny, like a lot of people, I always joke with people that Azaz, which is the name of Malika's kingdom, is basically Zazzau spelled backwards. But one of the cool things about Malika is really the only thing fictional are obviously the characters and their names, and then the actual name of the empire. But the location of the provinces like Borno, Nupe, Mandara or Kano, these are actually, or Fon, these are actually real places that existed. And Malika is set in 1499. If you actually do your research, like these were some of the, prevalent, African states at that time. So for me, it was very fun to be able to, because I wanted the liberty to be able to say, okay, this kingdom did this and that. That's why I created my own fictional kingdom. But at the same time, these places are real. The Shonga Empire is another one that's, is part of, Malika's story. And that's one of the biggest empires that ever existed in West Africa, as well. But for Malika, I started with Queen Amina of Zazzau. That's really the character that I researched and said, okay, I really want to base Malika on some of the same principles that Queen Amina had, and then obviously, create my own spin for that. With Iyanu, it was actually the opposite. It started with the walls of Benin. That is something that I feel like needs, like a lot of people don't even know just the scale and the massive nature of something like that. If you do your research, they said that like if you were able to line them up, like the walls of Benin were actually, I think, 4 times longer than the Great Wall of China. It's a lot of people, you don't know.
You find it's hard to believe, boy. You hear
it's hard to be, it's so hard to believe, but these are things that are out there. Like I think it was Fred Pierce, who was an English journalist that traveled to Benin, I believe sometime in the 17th or 16th century. I can't remember right now, but he actually wrote this account that this is one of the world's greatest wonders ever. So these are and so it started with that. Like for Iyanu, I was like, okay, I have to write a story around this concept. So for me, it really depends. It could be a location, it could be a character, or it could just be a moment in history that I say, oh, this is great, and I want to build, on top of that as well.
All righty. So we're going to take a break, but when we come back, we will be talking about 2 things that I really want to get into. One is I really want to find out some more about Iyanu, because I saw some of the artwork and I saw a photo of the delivery of those who supported the Kickstarter, and they're already getting ready to start receiving their copies.
Yeah.
And 2, we want to talk about the jump into visual and some of the great artists that he's been able to work with, the collaborations that brought the success about. So we'll be back after this.
Raz! It is clear your quarrel is with me. I will no longer tolerate Azazian bloodshed in your petty rebellion.
Petty? You do not deserve the throne!
Let me make this easy for the both of us. I challenge you to single combat. You win, you are king.
Select your champion, my queen.
I am my champion. Look, Dobari, my concern right now is with quelling this rebellion, not making my province chiefs feel useful.
Perhaps we would not have problems with the rebels if my queen did not aid the kingdom of Atala in their war. Many Azazians disapprove.
Malika, I too was not in favor of you supporting King Bass.
So what then? Kill an ally?
Face it, Malika! Your alliance with Atala was a mistake. You have become reckless and irresponsible. And now you have doomed us all.
Planning to kill a guest, Queen Malika?
War is coming.